On the night of July 18, 1969, off Martha's Vineyard, an event involving Senator Edward Ted Kennedy would shake the nation, changing his career and his life forever. At just 37, Kennedy was a rising political star, the youngest of the Kennedy brothers, with a powerful legacy to uphold. His brothers, President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy, had both tragically been assassinated, and Ted was seen as a key figure in the Senate, even a potential presidential candidate in 1972. But that night would alter his path. After participating in a boat race near the island, Kennedy attended a party with friends and political figures, including Mary Jo Kopechne, a 28-year-old secretary with a promising future. Around 11 p.m., Kennedy left the party with Mary Jo, claiming he was giving her a ride back to her hotel. However, she had left her handbag and room key behind, casting doubt on his explanation. At midnight, Kennedy's car was spotted speeding down an unpaved road near Chappaquiddick. As the car neared a small bridge, Kennedy lost control, and the vehicle plunged into a tidal pond, landing upside down. Kennedy managed to escape, but Mary Jo was trapped inside the submerged car. Instead of immediately seeking help, Kennedy walked back to the party and confided in his cousin and friend, but no one contacted authorities. He then swam to Edgartown, where he changed into dry clothes. The next morning, he was seen calmly walking around the hotel. It wasn't until late morning that he finally reported the incident, by which time the car had been discovered and Mary Jo's body recovered. The delayed response and Kennedy's actions raised questions that have lingered ever since. Why didn't he act immediately? Could Mary Jo have been saved? Why did he wait so long to report the accident? The investigation was brief, and Kennedy's televised statement offered no new clarity. He claimed he was overwhelmed with panic and grief, but many wondered if his primary concern was protecting his political future. Speculation swirled. Rumors that Mary Jo might have been pregnant surfaced, but were never substantiated. Some believed she could have survived in an air pocket in the car for hours if help had arrived sooner. Kennedy's friends described him as deeply shaken in the days that followed, with his wife suffering a miscarriage and his father's health worsening from the stress of the scandal. Legally, Kennedy faced little consequence. He pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident and received a 2-month suspended sentence. But politically, the damage was done. The incident forever marred his reputation and dashed any hopes of running for president. While Kennedy would go on to serve in the Senate for decades, respected for his legislative work, the questions surrounding Chappaquiddick remained unanswered. Mary Jo Kopechne's story, overshadowed by the political fallout, ended in mystery. The details of that night, the unanswered questions, the possibility of a different outcome, still haunt those who lived through it. Could it have turned out differently if Kennedy had acted faster? The Chappaquiddick incident remains one of the most debated moments in American political history, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions that continue to echo to this day. On March 3, 2023, Latavia T. McGee, a 33-year-old mother of 6, traveled to Matamoros, Mexico for a tummy tuck procedure, accompanied by 3 close friends, Eric James Williams, Shahid Woodard, and Zindel Brown. The group, from South Carolina, rented a white minivan for the trip, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. Around 11:45 a.m. on March 3rd, their routine journey took a horrific turn. Gunmen, believed to be members of the Gulf Cartel, pulled up beside them on the streets of Matamoros. Without warning, they opened fire. Brown and Woodard were struck, while McGee, desperate to protect herself, was confronted by one of the attackers. Williams, too, was shot and trying to flee. The gunman, thinking the group was involved in smuggling, seized the friends, forcing them into their vehicle. What followed was a nightmare few could endure. A bystander captured the horrific abduction on video, and it quickly spread across the internet. Woodard, gravely injured, turned to his friends and told them he loved them. As McGee held back tears, she could only apologize, knowing their fate was slipping away. The group was transported to a remote location where McGee and Williams were held captive, their friends, Brown and Woodard, dead. McGee, in her desperation, asked to see the footage of their kidnapping. A guard showed it to her, further deepening her fear that their families would never know the truth. In a twist of fate, a man who had once been their captor turned into a reluctant savior. This man, an American himself, pleaded with his superiors to release McGee and Williams. He warned them that once they were freed, he would have to flee too. Blindfolded, the two survivors were transported through the night, hidden under bodies to avoid detection. After hours of evading authorities, they were finally freed by Mexican authorities, acting on a tip-off. In the cold, early hours of the morning, they were found, but the joy of survival was tempered by the loss of their friends. The kidnapping, broadcasted across the world, sent shockwaves through the public. For McGee and Williams, it was a trauma they would never forget. But the nightmare didn't end with their rescue. The cartel's mistake had led to the tragic deaths of two innocent men, Shahid Woodard and Zindel Brown, and the ripple effect of their loss was felt across the globe. Authorities later discovered the cartel had mistaken the group for Haitian smugglers, a deadly error that led to devastating consequences. In response, both U.S. and Mexican authorities launched a massive investigation, while the White House condemned the violence. Calls for military intervention mounted, but the pain of the families was undeniable. Woodard's family, still reeling from his brutal death, would soon mark his 34th birthday with a heavy heart. The kidnapping also sparked wider concerns about safety in Mexico. The U.S. State Department had issued a Level 4 advisory for Tamaulipas, where Matamoros is located, citing the dangers of cartel violence, kidnappings, and murder. Yet, despite the warnings, many still traveled to Mexico for affordable medical procedures, as McGee had in years past. This time, however, tragedy struck. While McGee and Williams continued to recover from their physical and emotional wounds, the families of the two men lost in the ordeal are left with a gaping hole that can never be filled. The victims' deaths were not just another statistic in a region plagued by violence. They were people with families and futures whose lives were cruelly snatched away in an instant. December 11th, 2018, started like any other day in Houston, Texas. But by nightfall, one family's world had been turned upside down. 19-year-old Christian Estes Johnson had dreams of joining the U.S. Army. A recent high school graduate, he was athletic, active in football and basketball, and deeply involved in his local Christian group. That day, he was at home on Ivy Knoll Road, hanging out with his best friend, 18-year-old Muhammad Alagil. The two had been close for years, though Muhammad had recently found himself in legal trouble, facing an aggravated robbery charge. Like many young people, they were drawn to viral social media trends, and on that fateful day they decided to participate in one of the most reckless, the No Lackin challenge. The so-called game involved one person pulling a loaded gun on another and asking, "Are you lackin?" slang for questioning if the other was armed. The idea was that no one would actually fire. It was meant to test readiness and bravado, but in reality, it was a recipe for disaster. Inside Christian's bedroom, the game began. Christian picked up his AR-15 rifle while Muhammad held a semi-automatic pistol. What started as a tense, adrenaline-fueled moment quickly spiraled into horror. Muhammad pulled the trigger. A gunshot echoed through the room as the bullet struck Christian in the head. He collapsed instantly. The excitement vanished. In its place, shock, silence, and the weight of irreversible tragedy. Christian's brothers, who were also in the house, rushed to the scene, only to find him lifeless on the floor. Panic set in. Instead of helping, Muhammad ran, fleeing the house and abandoning the gun as he bolted. News of the shooting spread rapidly. Christian's family was left reeling, unable to process how a simple hangout turned into a nightmare. His sister, Shira Estes Johnson, refused to believe it was an accident. She was convinced that Muhammad had intentionally killed Christian, dismissing the idea that it was just a challenge gone wrong. As police launched their investigation, Muhammad was quickly arrested. At first, he claimed self-defense, saying that he and Christian had argued. But when confronted with witness testimony, he admitted the truth. They had been playing the no lackin challenge when the shooting occurred. In court, the prosecution painted a grim picture. They argued that the game itself was reckless enough, but Mohammed's criminal history made the situation even more dangerous. At the time of the shooting, he was already out on bond for aggravated robbery. Prosecutors pushed for a $100,000 bond, but given the severity of the case and Mohammed's flight risk, the judge raised it to $250,000. Mohammed's defense attorney argued that the shooting wasn't premeditated. It was a tragic accident fueled by a dangerous internet trend. But for Christian's family, that explanation wasn't enough. To them, Mohammed had made a conscious choice to pull the trigger, and they were outraged that he was only charged with second-degree manslaughter. Christian's death was not an isolated incident. The no lackin challenge had already claimed other lives across the country. What was meant to be a test of bravery had turned into a deadly game, proving once again that internet-fueled trends can have real, devastating consequences. As the trial continued, Christian's family focused on a different mission, turning their loss into a warning. They wanted people to remember Christian not as a victim of a senseless challenge, but as a young man with dreams, ambitions, and a bright future. They hoped that by sharing his story, they could prevent others from making the same deadly mistake. Because in the end, this wasn't just another internet trend. It was a reminder that one impulsive decision can change everything forever. It was a quiet evening in November 2024, the kind where the hum of passing cars blends into the background, where the road feels predictable, safe. But on the RM12 motorway in La Manga, Spain, the ordinary was about to shatter in the most horrifying way. A group of British men, likely looking forward to a relaxing trip, never saw it coming. A speeding vehicle, towing something massive, rushed down the highway. The cargo? A 32-foot speedboat, one of the infamous narco lanchas often used in smuggling, built for one thing: speed. With its powerful twin 300-horsepower engines, it was a machine meant to cut through ocean waves undetected. But that night, it became something far deadlier. Without warning, the boat broke free. It didn't just slip off, it launched. At a staggering speed of 120 kilometers per hour, the massive vessel turned into a flying battering ram, slicing through the air before coming down with devastating force, right on top of a Seat Leon. Inside were 3 British men. The driver and front seat passenger, aged 49 and 57, never stood a chance. The impact was immediate, brutal. Their lives were gone in an instant. The third man, 54 years old, sat in the back. He survived, but just barely. Critical injuries left him fighting for his life as emergency responders worked desperately to save him. But the destruction didn't stop there. The sheer force of the crash set off a chain reaction. The motorway became a scene of chaos. 6 more vehicles caught in the mayhem, cars skidding off the road, some overturned, others crushed beyond recognition. Twisted metal, shattered glass. A highway turned into a war zone. Rescue teams fought against time, working for over 30 minutes to free those trapped in the wreckage. The injured, including 2 women and 2 men, were rushed to hospitals, their conditions uncertain. Then came the questions and the fear. This wasn't just some freak accident. The boat wasn't an ordinary vessel. It was built for smugglers, designed to outrun police on open water, and the person responsible for towing it, gone, fled the scene before authorities arrived. Was it an accident? Or was it something more sinister? Investigators moved quickly, sifting through the wreckage, searching for answers. Among the twisted debris, they found something: a set of supermarket receipts. A small clue, but perhaps enough. Authorities pulled security footage from nearby stores, hoping to identify the driver, to track down whoever had let this deadly machine loose. Meanwhile, the victims' identities were confirmed. British nationals, their car packed with golf clubs, likely on their way to the famed La Manga Golf and Tennis Resort. A trip that should have been nothing more than a relaxing getaway had ended in unthinkable tragedy. Photos from the scene showed the horrifying aftermath. The speedboat still lying across the motorway, wreckage all around it. The damage told the story. A massive projectile, a moment of chaos, lives stolen in an instant. And yet, the biggest mystery remained. Where was the driver? The boat itself offered no answers. A Zodiac inflatable, no visible registration numbers, its origins unclear. Was it being transported for innocent reasons, or had it been part of something much larger, something criminal? Officials, now working with the British Embassy, dug deeper, looking for any trace of where it had come from and how this disaster had been set in motion. Beyond the loss of life, the crash sent shockwaves through the region. The RM-12, a major road connecting La Manga and Cartagena, was shut down for hours. Traffic backed up for miles. People who had planned nothing more than a quiet evening found themselves trapped in the aftermath of a nightmare. And still, the questions remain. How could something this large, this dangerous, have been so poorly secured? Was this truly a case of negligence, or was there more to the story? And most hauntingly of all, what happened to the person who left this devastation behind? The search for answers continues, but for the families left grieving, no answer will ever be enough. One moment of recklessness, or something far worse, turned an ordinary night into a catastrophe. And for those who survived, the memory of that night will never fade. On March 15, 2018, the Sharp family, a close-knit group from Creston, Iowa, set out for what they hoped would be a much-needed escape. Kevin Sharp, a well-respected stock car racer known as the Sharpshooter, was joined by his wife Amy, a compassionate and dedicated mother, and their two children, 12-year-old Sterling and 7-year-old Adriana. The family had rented a condo in Tulum, Mexico, and after a smooth journey from Iowa, they were ready for some much-needed rest and relaxation. But in just a matter of days, everything would spiral into an unimaginable tragedy. The Sharps were in high spirits when Amy texted her mother around 7 p.m. on March 14th, confirming their safe arrival. "We made it to our condo," she wrote, reassuring her family back home. The next day, everything took a turn. The family had planned to visit local attractions, take in the sights, and maybe even visit a water park. But then, around 5 p.m. on March 15th, Kevin sent a message to his friend Travis Anderson. It would be the last communication anyone would hear from the Sharps. By March 21st, the family was expected to return home, first to St. Louis, then on to Danville, Illinois for a college basketball game. But when they didn't show, the silence was deafening. The worry set in, and by the early hours of March 22nd, the Sharp family was officially reported missing. Friends and family flooded social media with appeals for help, desperate for answers. As the hours ticked by, anxiety gripped everyone who knew them. The authorities launched an investigation, and their phones were traced to Tulum, but there was no sign of movement. Then, late on March 22nd, a discovery no one could have prepared for. Employees at the condo complex began to notice a strange, foul odor coming from the Sharps unit. Concerned, they entered, and what they found stopped them cold. The Sharps were dead. Kevin, Amy, Sterling, and Adriana, all of them, but there was no sign of foul play. The Mexican authorities, alongside the U.S. State Department, confirmed the unthinkable. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to a malfunctioning water heater. A tragic accident, but a chilling one. A gas leak in a poorly maintained unit took the lives of an entire family, and it left the town of Creston reeling. Kevin, known for his racing triumphs and community involvement, would never cross the finish line again. Amy, a beacon of kindness, was gone, as were Sterling and Adriana. Their bright spirits extinguished too soon. The family's death left a gaping hole, but it also raised urgent questions about tourist safety in Mexico. Despite the deaths not being related to violent crime, the shadows of rising violence and crime rates in regions like Tulum were impossible to ignore. A U.S. State Department advisory had warned of increased crime in Quintana Roo, where Tulum is located. Yet, tragically, the Sharp family's deaths only added to the growing concern for American tourists. As the community mourned the loss, others took to social media to share their support for the grieving families. Messages flooded in, but no amount of words could fill the void left behind by the loss of a mother, father, and 2 children. The Sharp family's tragic death served as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictability of the dangers that can lurk just out of sight. It was a rainy evening in Pune, India. The city, drenched in quiet, seemed to hit pause. Most people were indoors, sipping tea, watching the storm. But inside one apartment complex, something tragic was about to unfold. 15-year-old Arya Sri Rao was the kind of kid parents brag about. Shy but sharp, with a love for technology. His father worked in Nigeria, while his mother, Swati, managed the home. For most of his life, he was a regular teenager. Then, things changed. Over 6 months, Arya became obsessed with the Blue Whale Challenge, an insidious online game that led players through escalating self-harm tasks, ending with the ultimate challenge, suicide. Once happy and social, Arya withdrew. He locked himself in his room, barely speaking to his family. July 25, 2024. Outside, the rain poured. Inside, Swati tended to her sick younger child. She called Arya for dinner. He ate briefly, then retreated to his room. Normal, right? Then, a chilling message hit the apartment's WhatsApp group. A child had fallen from one of the buildings. Panic, horror, a mother's worst nightmare. Swati ran to Arya's room, empty. She rushed downstairs and found the unthinkable. Arya, motionless on the ground. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Why? How did a bright teenager go from playing games to planning his own death? The answer lay in the dark world of the Blue Whale Challenge. Police found a notebook in Arya's room filled with coded notes, house maps, and sketches marking where he would jump. The words "log out" and "XD" were scrawled across the pages, cryptic, but eerily linked to the game. Investigators discovered he had been communicating with other players, possibly even a manipulative curator. Looking back, Swati saw the warning signs. Arya had started listening to dark music, talking about death. Once, he even told her, life and death are the same. She hadn't understood then. Now, she wished she had. Arya wasn't the first victim. In 2017, a 14-year-old Mumbai boy had also fallen prey. Worldwide, the game had claimed over 100 lives. Each time, families were left asking, how did this happen? Following Arya's death, Pune police launched a cyber investigation, trying to track the figures behind this digital nightmare. His father, who flew back from Nigeria upon hearing the news, called for a permanent ban on such dangerous games. He urged parents to look beyond the screen, to really see what was happening in their children's minds. Arya's tragic end sent shockwaves through his community. It was a brutal reminder of how young minds can be manipulated, how the internet's dark corners can twist innocence into something unrecognizable. His story reignited discussions on online safety and, more importantly, the crucial conversations parents need to have with their kids. Arya Sri Rao didn't just log out. His story became a warning, a plea to be more aware, more present, and to never underestimate the deadly power of an online trend. December 15th, 1995. A cold, quiet evening near Castellandinas, a historic hill fort close to Newquay, Cornwall. But at 6:30 p.m., everything changed. Mark Wade, a 31-year-old truck driver from Fren, had been behind the wheel since early morning. Exhaustion clung to him like a heavy weight as he made his way back to his company's depot in St. Column. His cargo? A Caterpillar digger, strapped onto a low-loader lorry. A routine haul, a job he had done before. But what he didn't know was that a single mistake had already sealed the fate of 5 innocent people. The digger's arm, a massive hunk of steel meant to be locked in place, wasn't secured properly. Maybe he thought it was stable. Maybe he was too tired to double-check. Either way, it was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Wade navigated the narrow B road, the unfastened arm began to swing, silent, deadly, unnoticed. And then, in an instant, it veered into the opposite lane. 4 cars were approaching. There was no time to react. The digger's arm tore through the cars like a blade through paper. Glass exploded into the air. Screeching tires, shattered bodies, 5 lives were lost in an instant. The survivors were left with horrific injuries, their lives forever altered. Emergency services rushed in, 10 ambulance crews, firefighters, police officers. They fought through the wreckage, searching for any signs of life, pulling bodies from mangled vehicles, trying to make sense of the destruction. But for 5 souls, there was nothing anyone could do. As the smoke settled, the investigation began. How had this happened? Why had the digger's arm been loose? The truth was chilling in its simplicity. It should have been locked with a metal pin and chains. The equipment was there. The instructions were clear. But Wade hadn't used them. And what made it worse? He had never been trained properly. His employers, Baseley Plant Hire and Cheptow Plant Hire, had never ensured he knew how to transport heavy machinery safely. Their negligence cost 5 people their lives. The court saw the failure for what it was. The companies were fined £500,000 for disregarding safety. But what about Wade? He wasn't a criminal. He was a man burdened with guilt so crushing it consumed him. The weight of that night never left him. He didn't fight his fate, didn't try to defend himself. When the psychiatric reports came in, the truth was undeniable. He was not the same man who had started that drive. PTSD, depression. The horrors of that night had broken him. The community saw it too. Over 1,000 people signed a petition pleading for mercy, arguing that no prison sentence could be worse than the punishment he was already serving in his mind. The judge agreed. No jail cell could hold him tighter than his own guilt. Instead, Wade was sent to a psychiatric hospital, left to live with the ghosts of that December night. For the victims' families, justice was a hollow word. Their loved ones weren't coming back. The pain, the grief, the questions, none of it would ever fade. But they weren't the only ones who suffered. Richard Bobk, a firefighter from St. Column Major Fire Station, had been one of the first on the scene. He had seen the wreckage, the bodies, the devastation, and it changed him. Richard was a father, a man who loved his daughters, Selena and Anna, more than anything, but the trauma dug into him, deeper and deeper, until he couldn't escape it. No one talked about PTSD back then. No one saw the silent wounds it left. 8 months later, the weight of it all became too much. Richard was gone. His daughters were left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. Selena later spoke about how her father's loss reshaped their lives, how the years they should have had together were stolen by something no one could see. Years later, his name was finally honored. A plaque at St. Colum's Fire Station, a place on the National Fire Brigade Memorial in London. His fellow firefighters gathered to remember him, not just for the tragedy he endured, but for the man he had been before that night. In 2017, 22-year-old Jesse Clint Galganoff had the world at his feet. A brilliant student, he had just graduated from Wesleyan University in Connecticut with a perfect 4.0 GPA. He was set to attend medical school, but decided to take an 8-month adventure through South America and Asia before committing to his studies. His journey began on September 24th, when he flew from Montreal to Lima, Peru. After spending a few days exploring the city and staying at the Loki hostel, Jesse boarded an 8-hour overnight bus to Huaraz, arriving on September 28th. He checked into a backpacker hostel and spent the day preparing for a 4-day trek along the Santa Cruz Trail. Before setting off, he informed his mother that he might be out of contact for a few days. On September 30th, Jesse began his hike as planned. By the evening, he had reached the Tuctupampa camp, where he shared a campsite with 2 French hikers. They later described his behavior as concerning. He seemed disoriented, complained of headaches and diarrhea, and mentioned getting lost. However, by the next morning, Jesse appeared to be in better spirits, and they all had breakfast together before he continued on his journey. The last confirmed sighting of Jesse was on October 1st, when he met a Czech hiking group near the Punta Union Pass and asked them for water. After that, he disappeared without a trace. At first, his mother wasn't alarmed when he failed to check in after his 4-day hike. She assumed he might have extended his trek. But as days passed with no word, her worry turned to panic. Desperate for information, she reached out to his friends on Facebook. Only one responded, saying they had last spoken to Jesse on September 29th. With growing fear, Jesse's mother filed a missing persons report on October 14th. She contacted embassies in Peru, the U.S., and Canada, hoping for assistance. But the investigation hit roadblocks. The owner of the hostel where Jesse had supposedly stayed denied he had ever checked in. Local muleteers, who frequently traveled the trails, refused to speak to authorities, fearing they would be blamed for his disappearance. Determined to find their son, Jesse's parents took matters into their own hands. They flew to Peru, walked the trail where he was last seen, and hired a private Israeli search and rescue team. They spent over $1 million on the search, raising funds through donations and a GoFundMe campaign. To encourage leads, Jesse's parents offered increasing cash rewards. First $10,000, then $30,000, and eventually a staggering $500,000, but no solid information ever emerged. Several theories surfaced. His parents suspected he had been kidnapped for forced labor by a cartel, which fueled their belief that offering money might lead to answers. Others speculated that he had fallen victim to acute altitude sickness, wandered off, and perished in the wilderness. But without any evidence, both theories remained unproven. In honor of their son, Jesse's father launched JesseProtected.com, a website dedicated to raising awareness about missing persons and providing resources for families facing similar tragedies. To this day, Jesse Galganov's fate remains a chilling mystery, leaving his loved ones searching for answers that may never come. It was a regular April day in Greenfield, Ohio, the kind of day that felt like any other. But for the Stevens family, it would become the worst day of their lives. Jacob Stevens, 13, was full of life. He loved the outdoors, hanging out with friends, and like most kids his age, scrolling through TikTok. Viral trends fascinated him. It was how he connected, laughed, and kept up with the latest challenges. But one weekend, a challenge found him, and it was one he wouldn't survive. The Benadryl challenge had been lurking on TikTok since 2020, daring teens to take excessive doses of the over-the-counter allergy medicine to hallucinate. The fun part? Downing 12 to 14 pills, way beyond the safe limit. Jacob, eager to impress, decided to try it. With his friends recording, he swallowed a handful of pills, unaware that he had just made a fatal mistake. What was meant to be a quick thrill turned into a nightmare. Jacob's body reacted violently. He began to seize uncontrollably. Panic set in as his friends realized something was horribly wrong. They called for help, and Jacob was rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life. Doctors did everything they could, but the damage was irreversible. He was placed on a ventilator, his body still but his family's hope alive. For 6 agonizing days, his father, Justin, and grandmother, Deanna, prayed for a miracle. But on the 6th day, the doctors gave them the news no parent should ever hear. Jacob's brain had shut down. He would never wake up. Faced with the impossible, Justin made the heartbreaking decision to remove Jacob from life support. Surrounded by loved ones, they said their final goodbyes. Just days earlier, he was a happy, laughing teenager. Now, he was gone. His friends, who had watched everything unfold, were left in shock. What started as a moment of fun had become a haunting memory they'd carry forever. In the aftermath, grief wasn't the only thing driving Jacob's family. It was a need to prevent this from happening to someone else. Justin went public, sharing Jacob's story, even releasing a photo of him on life support. He wanted people to see the brutal reality behind viral challenges. This wasn't a game, he said. It was too much for his body, and now he's gone. Jacob wasn't the first victim. In 2020, a 15-year-old Oklahoma girl also died from the challenge. Despite warnings from health officials and statements from TikTok and Johnson & Johnson, the trend kept spreading, and teens kept risking their lives for fleeting internet fame. The FDA had warned that high doses of Benadryl could cause seizures, heart failure, coma, and death. TikTok claimed to remove dangerous content and block related hashtags, insisting that safety was a priority. But for Jacob's family, these measures came too late. Determined to make a difference, they began advocating for stricter regulations, tighter controls on social media, and age restrictions on over-the-counter drugs like Benadryl. Jacob's story gained national attention, sparking debates on social media's role in shaping young minds and the real-world consequences of viral trends. For the Stevens family, the pain is unending, but as they grieve, they fight, hoping Jacob's story will save lives and spare other families the same heartbreak. They hold on to the memories of the kind, funny, and loving boy they lost. Gone too soon, but never forgotten. On June 11, 2023, a terrible accident struck the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales, Australia. What began as a joyful wedding celebration ended in an unimaginable tragedy. The night was filled with laughter and dancing as guests gathered at Wandon Valley Estate to celebrate the wedding of Mitchell Gaffney and Malene Edsel. 35 people climbed aboard the bus, their hearts still full from the night's celebrations. The vehicle, a 2009 Volvo B7R operated by Link Bus Lines, rumbled to life, its headlights cutting through the thick night air. Among the passengers were couples, friends, and members of the Singleton Roosters Australian Rules Football Club, people who had their entire futures ahead of them. But at 11:30 p.m., as the bus neared a roundabout at the M15 Wine Country Drive interchange near Greta, the night took a horrifying turn. Thick fog obstructed the vision, but the driver, 58-year-old Brett Button, pressed on. Then, in an instant, he lost control. The vehicle tipped violently, rolling onto its side with a sickening crash. The devastation was unimaginable. 10 people never made it out alive. Among them were 22-year-old Kea McBride and her mother, 52-year-old Nadine McBride. Kane Simons, just 21 years old, was gone. Zachary Bray, 29th Angus Craig, Tori Keuburn, Rebecca Mullen, names that would later be etched into headlines, into the hearts of their loved ones. Darcy Bowman, Andrew and Lynn Scott, all in their 30s, their futures stolen in an instant. Survivors stumbled from the wreckage, some barely able to stand, others too injured to move. 25 people suffered agonizing wounds, and one critically injured passenger was airlifted to Sydney in a desperate bid to save their life. News of the crash tore through the country, leaving a nation in mourning. Emergency crews worked through the night, their faces grim as they pulled bodies from the wreckage. The horror of what had happened began to unfold, and authorities scrambled to find answers. Brett Button, the man behind the wheel, was arrested at the scene. Investigators soon discovered a chilling truth. He had taken tramadol, a powerful painkiller, within the last 24 hours. The dosage was dangerously high, far beyond what was safe. His medical history painted an even darker picture. Chronic pain had plagued him since the 1990s, and for decades he had relied on tramadol to function. But the dependency had cost him. In 2022, a doctor had flagged his addiction, and he was removed from a previous job. Yet, somehow, he continued to work as a driver. Somehow, he was still trusted with the lives of others. As the investigation continued, a painful reality became clear. Button had been speeding when he approached that roundabout. The fog was thick, but he didn't slow down. The people on that bus had no idea their fate rested in the hands of a man who should never have been behind the wheel that night. Grief turned into anger. Families shattered by the crash wanted justice, but when Button was initially charged with 10 counts of dangerous driving, causing death, and negligent driving, it felt like too little. Then, in January 2024, the stakes rose. He was charged with manslaughter. The victim's loved ones clung to the hope that true justice would be served, but hope can be cruel. In a later plea deal, the manslaughter charges were dropped. The legal system decided it was not murder, it was negligence. Button pleaded guilty to dangerous driving causing death and related offenses, but the outrage remained. By September 2024, the verdict was in. Brett Button was sentenced to 32 years in prison, with no chance of parole for 24 years. For some, it was a relief. For others, it wasn't enough. The decision to drop the manslaughter charges felt like an insult to the lives taken. The weight of the tragedy was immeasurable, and no sentence could bring back the loved ones who had been stolen that night. In the aftermath, a wave of support poured in. The Hunter Valley Bus Tragedy Fund, managed by Rotary, raised nearly $1.5 million to help the victims' families. Strangers from across Australia donated, their hearts breaking for those left behind. In January 2024, Dakarai Earl Cobb arrived in Medellín, Colombia, looking for a place to stay while he searched for more permanent housing. He found a room in the Santa Lucia neighborhood, renting from a local family who agreed to let him stay for a month. The landlords later recalled that he mostly kept to himself and was not very social. He would greet them occasionally, but beyond that, he remained private. When his rental period ended in early February, the landlords knocked on his door to check in, but there was no response. They assumed he might have gone out and thought little of it. 2 days later, on February 5th, they returned, growing concerned after noticing that the room remained silent. Using their spare key, they let themselves in and made a grim discovery. Dakarai was dead on his bed. It was clear that he had been deceased for several days. Panicked, the landlords immediately called the authorities. Investigators arrived and examined the scene before transporting Dakarai's body for an autopsy. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear evidence of a struggle, and none of his belongings appeared to be stolen. Initially, some suspected that his death might have been the result of a robbery gone wrong, but after speaking with the other tenants in the building, the police ruled out theft as a motive. As the investigation unfolded, a disturbing realization emerged. Dakarai was not the only one to die under strange circumstances that week. In the span of just 4 days, 3 other individuals were found dead in different locations across Medellín. 2 of them had fallen from the upper floors of their residences under unexplained conditions, while the third was found lifeless in a hotel room, with no signs of violence or struggle. The similarities between these deaths raised unsettling questions. Were these cases somehow connected? Had these people fallen victim to something more sinister? News of the mysterious deaths quickly spread, creating fear among both locals and tourists. Medellín had worked hard to improve its reputation in recent years, welcoming more visitors and promoting itself as a safe and thriving city. But with 4 unexplained deaths in such a short time, people began to worry. As safety concerns grew, tourism in the city started to decline. In response, Medellín's safety secretary, Manuel Villa, addressed the situation publicly and announced new security measures. He stated that officials would be focusing on issues like human trafficking, drug-related crimes, and organized criminal activity, which he believed could be linked to these incidents. He also warned that while the city welcomed tourists, it would not tolerate criminal behavior. "We invite visitors to enjoy Medellín's culture, food, and business opportunities," he said, "but those who engage in illegal activities will face consequences. We will not allow anyone to put public safety at risk." Despite the increased attention on the case, no suspects were ever arrested in connection to Dakarai's death. Investigators were unable to determine if the 4 deaths were related or if they were simply a series of tragic coincidences. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Dakarai's death remain a mystery, leaving many to wonder if the truth will ever be uncovered. February 26, 2021, started as an ordinary winter day in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But for the Arroyo family, it would become the day their world shattered. 9-year-old Ariani Jaylene Arroyo was a joyful child, full of life and energy. She loved dancing, taking on TikTok challenges, and sharing fun moments with her family. Her parents, Herberto and Crystal, knew she adored the app but believed she was engaging in harmless trends. What they didn't realize was how TikTok's algorithm worked, pulling young users deeper into an endless stream of content, sometimes with dangerous consequences. That day, Ariani stumbled upon the blackout challenge, a viral trend that encouraged users to hold their breath or restrict their airflow until they passed out, supposedly for a brief, euphoric rush. To an adult, it was reckless. To a child, it might have seemed like just another game to try. While her parents were busy around the house, Ariani decided to attempt the challenge, using the family's dog leash. Her younger brother, Eduardo, was the first to realize something was horribly wrong. He found his sister unresponsive, hanging from the leash. Panicked, he ran to get their father. Heriberto rushed to Ariani's side, desperately trying to revive her. Paramedics arrived, and she was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. The lack of oxygen had caused irreversible damage. On February 26, 2021, Ariani was pronounced brain dead. She was just 9 years old. Grief consumed the Arroyo family. They had trusted that the content on TikTok was safe. Now, they faced the devastating truth. It wasn't, and they weren't alone. Just months later, in July 2021, another tragedy struck. 8-year-old Leilani Erica Renee Walton from Temple, Texas, also attempted the blackout challenge after repeatedly seeing it on TikTok. Like Ariani, she believed it would be fun. Like Ariani, she never woke up. Two devastated families. One heartbreaking mission: justice. The Arroyos and Waltons joined forces, determined to prevent more children from falling victim to dangerous online trends. With the help of the Social Media Victims Law Center, they filed a lawsuit against TikTok, arguing that the platform's algorithm actively promoted the blackout challenge to young users, leading to their deaths. TikTok denied responsibility, claiming the blackout challenge existed long before the app and was never encouraged by its platform. But for the grieving families, these reassurances meant nothing. Their daughters were gone. The lawsuit accused TikTok of engineered addiction, arguing that its algorithm steered children toward harmful content, putting them in danger. The families weren't just seeking damages, they wanted accountability. More importantly, they wanted to raise awareness and prevent other parents from facing the same nightmare. Experts have long warned about the dangers of social media, especially for young users who may not fully understand the risks of the content they consume. The deaths of Ariani and Lania ignited a larger conversation about how much responsibility platforms like TikTok should bear in protecting their youngest users. Ariani and Lania were bright, vibrant girls with entire futures ahead of them, futures stolen by a senseless online trend. Their families now fight to ensure their stories serve as a warning, because no child should have to pay the ultimate price for a viral challenge. It was February 13, 2024, in Mesa, Arizona. Ray Longi, a 67-year-old father, grandfather, and devoted aviation enthusiast, was on his way to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport to pick up his wife. Ray had always loved planes, so much so that his family joked he could recognize an aircraft just by the sound of its engine. Living near Falcon Field Airport, he spent years watching planes take off and land, fascinated by the miracle of flight. But on this night, Ray would never make it to the airport. As he cruised down Greenfield Road in his red Lexus, a private jet began its takeoff just a short distance away. The sleek business aircraft roared down the runway, its engines screaming in the night. Then, something went terribly wrong. The plane struggled, failing to lift off. It veered off course, hurtling toward the road, toward Ray. The impact was devastating. In an instant, the jet slammed into his car, crumpling the vehicle like paper. Flames erupted. The jet skidded wildly, finally coming to a stop in a nearby orchard, engulfed in fire. Inside were 4 passengers: Drew Kimball, his 12-year-old son Grom, Spencer Lindell, and Rustin Randall. None of them survived. A teenage passenger managed to escape, but suffered severe burns. The shock spread like wildfire. Witnesses described the horrifying scene. The plane never even left the ground before it turned into a deadly missile. And Ray, he had been just blocks from his home, just minutes from safety. His daughter, Lorraine, couldn't believe it. "When I heard there was an accident, I assumed it was a car crash," she said. "When I found out a plane was involved, I couldn't believe it. My dad lived next to that airport for years. How could this happen?" Ray wasn't just a man who loved planes. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather. He spent his days with his wife, his children, and his 1-year-old grandson, Charles. He was the kind of man who never missed a chance to check in on his loved ones. Minutes before the crash, he had sent Lorraine a simple text. "Everything okay?" It was the kind of message he always sent. A small but powerful reminder of his love. Now, It was one of the last things he ever said to her. The grief was unbearable. The man who had spent his life admiring planes had been taken by one. It was cruel, unfair. But Lorraine knew one thing. Her father wouldn't want them to drown in sorrow. He'd want us to keep going, she whispered. Ray had spent his life helping others. He had supported Sunshine Acres Children's Home, donating during the holidays to bring joy to those in need. Now, his family encouraged others to continue his kindness, to give in his memory. For Ray's family, the answer wouldn't bring him back. But knowing the truth, that was the only way to move forward. On the night of March 11th, 1989, the streets of Matamoros, Mexico pulsed with energy. Among them was Mark James Kilroy, a senior at the University of Texas at Austin, celebrating the break with his childhood friends. They had come from different colleges: Bill Huddleston and Bradley Moore from Texas A&M, Brent Martin from Alvin Community College, but they were bound by years of friendship and the promise of an unforgettable trip. That night, as they made their way back to the U.S. border, everything seemed fine. Then Mark disappeared. It happened in an instant. The group had stopped briefly for a restroom break. Huddleston, half distracted by the night's events, noticed a man, Hispanic, a scar on his face, motioning toward Mark. He heard Mark say something like, "Didn't I just see you somewhere?" At the time, it didn't seem alarming. Maybe Mark had run into someone he met earlier that night. When Huddleston returned to the group, Mark was gone. They assumed the obvious. He had caught a ride back, met someone, or wandered off. But as the sun rose and Mark's hotel bed remained empty, panic set in. Calls to hospitals, jails, anywhere he could have ended up, nothing. The police didn't seem alarmed at first. Another drunk college kid lost in the chaos of spring break. But as the days passed and Mark remained missing, reality set in. Something was wrong. Mark's parents, James and Helen Kilroy, flew to Brownsville, Texas, launching a desperate search for their son. They flooded the city with over 20,000 flyers, pleading for information. A $15,500 reward was offered, but no real leads emerged. On March 26th, America's Most Wanted aired his case, pushing his story into the national spotlight. Still, silence. He had vanished without a trace. Then, something cracked. In early April, a small-time drug smuggler, Elio Hernandez Rivera, was stopped at a police roadblock in Matamoros. A routine arrest for marijuana possession, nothing unusual. But under questioning, he spoke of something far more sinister. He mentioned a place, the Santa Elena Ranch. The police, desperate for any break in Mark's case, decided to investigate. On April 11th, Mexican federal police stormed the ranch, the dry heat suffocating as they stepped onto the cursed soil. The first thing they noticed was the smell, thick, putrid, unmistakable. A shack stood nearby, a silent witness to whatever horrors had unfolded inside. As they stepped closer, the earth beneath them told its own tale. Graves, shallow, hastily dug, scattered across the property. They started digging. Body after body surfaced, twisted and dismembered. The remarkable fates. When they showed the ranch caretaker a photograph of Mark, the man pointed to the shack. That was where they had taken him. It was not just a crime scene, it was a slaughterhouse. Mark Kilroy had suffered unimaginably. The cult that operated here believed in sacrifice, a twisted ritual meant to grant them invincibility. Their leader, Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, had demanded the offering of an Anglo college student. Mark had been chosen at random. He had tried to escape, breaking free for a brief moment, running toward the edge of the ranch. But they had caught him, dragged him back, bound and gagged him inside that shack. They had told him he would not be harmed. 12 hours later, Constanzo took a machete and brought it down on Mark's neck. His legs were severed at the knees. His brain and spine removed, fed into the ritual cauldron like a gruesome tribute to their false gods. The discovery sent shockwaves through Mexico and the United States. The press swarmed the ranch, exposing the nightmare that had unfolded just miles from the Texas border. The killings were not isolated. The cult had been slaughtering people for months. 15 victims in total, their bodies mutilated and discarded like offerings to the abyss. Mark's parents returned home without their son, their grief now entangled with the cause. They founded an anti-drug nonprofit in his name, hoping to prevent others from falling into the same darkness. "We put our energy into the fight against drugs," James Kilroy later said. "We try to look forward, not back." But the horror wasn't over. 2 weeks after the mass grave was uncovered, the shack was burned to the ground, a wooden cross planted over the site. The search for Constanzo and his accomplice, Sarah Aldrate, intensified. On May 6th, police tracked him to an apartment in Mexico City. As officers closed in, Constanzo panicked. He began throwing money out the window, screaming, firing his gun wildly. Then, in his final act of control, he turned to his most loyal follower, Alvaro de Leon Valdez, and ordered him to do the unthinkable: kill him. When the police finally stormed the apartment, they found Constanzo and one of his men lying lifeless, executed on their own command. Nearby, black candles flickered, their wax dripping over eerie relics: swords, a blindfolded doll, the remnants of his sick devotion. The mastermind was dead, but his cult lived on. Sarah Aldrate and the remaining members were captured, charged with murder and other heinous crimes. And yet, there was no justice that could undo what had been done. No law that could erase the terror that had lurked just beyond the border, hidden in the shadows of the party streets where Mark had once laughed with his friends.